First at 10 o'clock, 17-year-old Jaden Birch, one of the teens convicted of murdering 12-year-old Mariah Smith, is now preparing to spend the rest of his life in prison after his sentencing today. TV20's Kayla Lewis shares why Smith's sister read a victim impact statement to the judge.
12-year-old Mariah Smith's family read victim impact statements to the judge, asking her to give 17-year-old Jaden Birch the max sentence, while Birch's family asked her for leniency. However, after a more than 20-minute decision, she sentenced Birch to life in prison.
As to the second-degree murder of Mariah Smith, you are sentenced to serve life in prison.
Judge Leandra Johnson says less than a month before the shooting, Birch stood before her and pled guilty to possession of a firearm by someone younger than 18, and she told him he could not have one.
23, 24, 25 times.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
It's August 24th, 2023. Just after 9 p.m. in Lake City, Florida. The streets are quiet, the air thick with the late summer heat. In one home, a mother is tucking her 12-year-old daughter into bed, a moment of peace, a moment that would be shattered in an instant. Outside, the night is about to take a violent turn. Over 20 gunshots break the silence, tearing through a family's home. No warning. No escape. Just a rapid barrage of bullets. And when the smoke clears, a child is gone, her life ended in the blink of an eye. But why her? Why this family? Who would do something so brutal, so heartless? What was the real reason behind the violence that took her life? As investigators begin to piece together the events, the truth will come to light, a story of revenge, a deadly plan gone horribly wrong, and a search for justice that will shake a community to its core. But even as the answers start to unfold, one question remains. Was this the end, or was there more lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? Stay with us. The story is far from over. It's a quiet night in Lake City, Florida. The kind of night where everything seems to be still, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Crickets hum in the background, their song filling the silence of a sleepy town. In homes all around, families are settling in, preparing for rest. Inside one home on Northwest Long Street, a mother tucks her 12-year-old daughter, Mariah, into bed, whispering the same words she's said 1,000 times. "Good night, baby. I love you." It's a peaceful, tender moment. But what neither Mariah nor her mother knew was that at that very moment, outside their home, a storm was brewing. A storm unlike any other. A storm that would shatter their lives in an instant. It's 9:05 p.m. In the stillness, the world outside their home is a different reality. On the other side of the street, hidden in the darkness, 3 teenagers are making their way down the road. They aren't thinking about the future. They aren't thinking about the consequences of their actions. What's about to happen is driven by something far deeper, something twisted, a long-standing feud that's been simmering just below the surface. And then, it happens. In a moment of brutal, mindless violence, more than 20 bullets are fired into the Smith family home. A deafening cacophony shatters the quiet of the night. The sound of glass breaking, walls cracking under the force of the bullets, the explosive impact of gunfire, all merge into one horrific symphony. In the blink of an eye, Mariah Smith's life is taken from her. She's shot while sitting on the couch, a quiet victim in the comfort of her own home. In an instant, everything changes. A mother's worst nightmare unfolds in the cruelest way possible. And outside, the world continues, unaware that a child has just been stolen from her family. The attack is swift. The perpetrators, young and reckless, don't wait to see the chaos they've caused. They don't stop to consider the lives they've ruined. They flee into the night, disappearing as quickly as they arrived. But in the aftermath, the questions begin to mount. Why Mariah? Why this house? What drove 3 teenagers, barely out of childhood themselves, to take a life? Was it truly just a random act of violence, or was there something more beneath the surface? Something darker. In the days that followed, the town of Lake City would be forced to face the brutal reality that something had gone terribly wrong in their quiet corner of Florida. Law enforcement flooded the neighborhood. Investigators scoured every inch of the crime scene, searching for clues. But in the early hours, there was no answer. Only a mother's cry, the haunting sound of her pain reverberating through the empty streets. In the coming days, the investigation would lead detectives into the dark corners of this small town. It would uncover secrets that no one could have expected, twisting motives that no one could have predicted. There would be a chilling confession, a trail of digital breadcrumbs left behind by one of the perpetrators. And when the truth finally began to surface, it would shock everyone who thought they knew the faces of the killers. But before we go there, before we dive into the complex web of lies, betrayal, and violence, let's take a step back. What started this feud? What made these teenagers, with their entire lives ahead of them, decide to take such a horrific action? Mariah's older brother had been involved in a heated argument at school, a trivial fight that, at the time, seemed like nothing more than the usual teenage drama. But to the three young men who carried out the attack, it was personal. The schoolyard spat turned into something much more dangerous. The kind of hatred that doesn't fade, but festers. It lingers, growing stronger, more potent with each passing day. Jaden Birch, one of the suspects, had been part of that fight. And when he was handed a gun, the situation escalated beyond words. Armed with weapons and fueled by anger, he recruited his friends, Matthew Rice and Jatarius Fluellen. Together, they walked to the Smith home, their minds made up, their hearts set on revenge. What they didn't know, or perhaps didn't care about, was the devastation they were about to cause. They didn't know about the mother who would wake up to find her daughter gone. They didn't know the pain that would haunt the family for years to come. In the days that followed, detectives would begin their work. It wouldn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. A gun, a laser sight, and a confession left behind in a digital message. One of the suspects, Jaden Birch, had made a mistake, one that would come back to haunt him. But the question remained, how had this senseless violence happened? What was the trigger that led to this tragedy? As the investigation unfolded, the truth became clearer. But the pain, the heartbreak, it would never go away. Mariah Smith was gone, and her family's lives would never be the same again. In the end, there are no easy answers. There are only the pieces left behind, the shattered lives, and the lingering question that will never go away: what drives a person, especially a teenager, to commit such an act of violence? And can we, as a society, prevent something like this from happening again? The investigation had just begun, but the haunting reality had already set in. And for the Smith family, the nightmare was only beginning. Mariah Smith was a young girl full of life, dreams, and an infectious laugh. She had that energy, the kind that made everyone around her smile. Her friends at school would always talk about how she lit up a room, how she made even the hardest days feel a little brighter. But behind that innocent smile, there was a family caught in the crossfire of something far darker: teenage grudges, resentments, and a senseless act of violence. Mariah was the youngest of 3 children, and she was especially close to her mother, Tadnisha Filer. The bond between them was one that many people envied. Mariah's world, like so many others, was filled with hope and possibility, until that night in August 2023, when everything was taken from her in a flash. What was supposed to be a peaceful evening with her family turned into a nightmare. Her mother, Tadnisha, never could have imagined that this would be the fate of her 12-year-old daughter. She had worked tirelessly to provide for her children, to make sure they had what they needed, to keep them safe from the dangers that lurked beyond their doorstep. Tadnisha raised her kids in Lake City, Florida, a small town far from the violence and turmoil that often makes the headlines. She had dreams for Mariah, dreams of a bright future, of seeing her daughter grow up and become everything she was meant to be. Tadnisha was a single mother, doing the best she could to make ends meet. She believed in family, in the idea that love and unity could carry them through. But tragedy, as it often does, found its way into her life when she least expected it. The kind of tragedy no one can ever truly prepare for. One moment, her daughter was tucking into bed, and the next, she was gone. Who could have predicted that her little girl, a young girl so full of potential, would become the target of such senseless violence? In the aftermath of that night, as Tadnisha grappled with the loss of her child, the community would begin to learn about the 3 teenagers who were responsible for taking Mariah's life. The first was Matthew Rice, 18 years old. Matthew Rice grew up in a neighborhood where violence was all too common, where it seemed like every decision he made was shaped by his surroundings. Raised in the kind of environment that breeds anger, resentment, and fear, Matthew's life had been marked by conflict from the very beginning. His family struggled, his friends were often caught up in bad situations, and he had no shortage of people around him who pushed him towards making bad decisions. As a young boy, he had been constantly confronted by the harsh realities of life. His relationship with his co-defendants was one of convenience, a shared sense of frustration with the world around them. He didn't have many friends, at least not ones who cared about him in the way that mattered. The influence of bad company and the need to prove himself had slowly begun to shape his worldview. By the time of the shooting, Matthew was angry. Angry at the world. Angry at everything. He had built up walls around himself that kept him isolated, and it seemed like the only way he could deal with that anger was to lash out. But what drives a person, especially a young man, to take the life of an innocent 12-year-old girl? What drove him to commit such an act, when the consequences were so clear? Then, there was Jaden Birch. 17 years old, and seemingly confident. On the outside, Jaden might have looked like just another teenager trying to figure out life. But there was always something darker lurking beneath the surface. Jaden had long been associated with the wrong crowd. He was no stranger to trouble, having been involved in petty fights, arguments, and confrontations. But this was different. This was something far more dangerous, something he couldn't easily walk away from. In his world, reputation mattered, how tough you were, how much power you had. And Jaden felt the need to validate himself through reckless actions. Jaden had always acted on impulse, never fully considering the consequences of his actions. He was driven by a need for validation, to prove himself to the people around him. In his mind, doing something as extreme as taking a life wasn't just an act of violence, it was an act of power. His access to weapons only added fuel to the fire, giving him the means to carry out his impulses. What made Jaden pull the trigger that night? Was it the desire to settle a score, to show his friends how tough he was? Or was it something more, something darker, a need for control and dominance in a world that had never given him the respect he craved? Finally, there was Jatarius Rashad Fluellen, just 14 years old. At only 14, Jatarius had already walked a dangerous path. He had already made decisions that would shape his future, and none of them seemed to lead toward anything good. Jatarius was caught up in the middle of a feud, one that had been building for weeks. But at his age, how could he fully understand the consequences of his actions? How could he understand that a decision made in anger could destroy so many lives? Jatarius didn't have the maturity or the perspective to see the world as anything more than a place full of threats and enemies. He didn't see himself as a victim, but he certainly didn't understand the gravity of what he was about to do. The violence he participated in was not just a result of peer pressure, it was a reflection of a system that had failed him and countless others like him. What was his role in this cold-blooded attack? Was he a follower, simply caught up in the chaos of the moment, or was there something in him, something far deeper, that made him pull that trigger? Each of these teenagers had their own story, their own path that led them to that night. But none of them could have predicted the destruction they would leave in their wake. The violence they brought into Mariah's world wasn't just senseless, it was the culmination of years of frustration, anger, and hopelessness. 3 young men, each carrying their own demons, came together that night with one purpose, to exact revenge. And in doing so, they took a life that was full of potential, a life that had barely begun. In the end, their decisions would lead them down a path of no return. But for Mariah's family, the pain was just beginning. The questions would never stop. And as the community of Lake City tried to make sense of what happened, one question remained in the air: what kind of world had we allowed these teenagers to grow up in? It was August 24, 2023. The night was heavy with humidity, the air thick with the quiet stillness that so often settles over small towns. But that peace would be shattered in a matter of minutes. Just after 9 p.m., a call came into Lake City Police. The dispatcher's voice was frantic, trembling with urgency. "A young girl has been shot," she said. The words, simple yet chilling, sent a shockwave through the town. Mariah Smith, only 12 years old, had been sitting on her living room couch when the attack occurred. More than 20 bullets, fired in rapid succession, tore through the walls of her home. A barrage of violence that left no room for anything but tragedy. Mariah, an innocent child, struck down in the most brutal way. It was hard to comprehend how something like this could happen. No forced entry, no warning. Just a hail of bullets, cutting through the calm of a suburban evening, and leaving nothing but the silence of death in its wake. The question that loomed large in the aftermath was simple: why? Why Mariah? Why did these teenagers choose her home to unleash this deadly assault? What drove them to pick her as the victim in a feud that had nothing to do with her? The attack seemed random, senseless, even. A home, a family, completely unprepared for the storm that was about to hit. As detectives worked to piece together the details of the night, there was one thing they knew for certain: this wasn't just about a fight between teens. It wasn't just a random act of violence. There was something deeper, something more personal, hiding behind the motives of the perpetrators. The fact that Mariah was the one to be caught in the crossfire of a feud between her brother and his classmates was almost incomprehensible. She had nothing to do with their petty grievances, yet she became the victim of their reckless actions. The violence wasn't even meant for her. But that didn't change the reality of the situation. When the police arrived, it was immediately clear that this was no ordinary crime scene. The home, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground. Inside, Mariah's lifeless body lay on the living room couch, where she had been watching TV just moments before. The impact of the bullets had been immediate, leaving no time for her to react, no time to understand what was happening. Her family, unaware of the horror unfolding just feet away, had no idea that their lives were about to be torn apart. The detectives, upon entering the home, were met with a quiet that contrasted sharply with the violence that had taken place. The air was still, but the weight of the tragedy hung heavy in the atmosphere. As first responders moved quickly through the house, they could already see the devastation. There was no struggle. No sign of forced entry. Just the aftermath of a senseless attack, a house, a home, broken by over 20 bullets. Mariah's family was close by, but they weren't aware of what was happening until the police arrived at their doorstep. In that moment, Tadnisha Filer, Mariah's mother, would be forced to face the unimaginable. She had spent years protecting her children, keeping them safe, giving them everything they needed to grow and thrive. But now, in the most cruel and unforgiving way, she was faced with a loss that would never be healed. The detectives, piecing together the evidence, quickly realized that this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a targeted attack, and the target had been Mariah's brother, not her. The gunman had intended to take out her older sibling, caught up in a petty schoolyard argument. But in the chaos of the assault, they missed their target. Instead, they killed an innocent girl, a girl who had no part in their feud. The more the investigation progressed, the more the details of the crime scene painted a picture of cold-blooded recklessness. The gunfire had been strategic, aimed with deadly precision, but without thought for who would be caught in the crossfire. The fact that they shot into a home without knowing who was inside spoke volumes about the disregard they had for human life. But this wasn't just a random attack, it was the product of deeper frustrations, of a desire for revenge that had festered for months.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
The schoolyard fight, the insults, the broken friendships, all of it had led to this one moment, this single act of violence that would ruin so many lives. And for Mariah Smith, it was over in an instant. No warning. No chance to escape. Her future, once so full of promise, now gone forever. As the night wore on, the question that loomed over the investigation was this: why did this happen? Why did these teenagers, barely out of childhood themselves, think they could settle their differences with a hail of gunfire? Why did they choose to end a life that was just beginning? And why did it have to be Mariah's life? The answers would come, slowly, over the next few weeks. But for the Smith family, the answers didn't matter. The pain, the grief, the confusion, it would never be enough to bring Mariah back. What was taken could never be returned. And yet, the search for justice, for understanding, would continue, as the community of Lake City struggled to make sense of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. As detectives worked tirelessly through the night, they began to sift through the remnants of what was left at the crime scene. Every corner of the Smith family home had been combed, every piece of evidence analyzed under the harsh glare of investigative lights. But it was outside, near the street, where they discovered the first key clue that would help unravel the story. 25 shell casings were found scattered across the front yard, evidence of the sheer force and speed with which the shooters had unleashed their attack. Each shell, cold and lifeless, painted a picture of an assault that was far from random. The bullets had been fired with deadly precision, as if the shooters knew exactly where they were aiming. They had no intention of missing. And it wasn't just the casings that caught the detectives' attention, it was what they found next, a laser sight, left behind in the chaos of the attack. A laser sight, usually used to improve aim in low light, was something the shooters clearly didn't need. It was an odd piece of evidence in what was already an incredibly violent and disturbing crime. But it was also something personal. A connection, perhaps, between the perpetrators and the crime scene that would soon come into sharper focus. The investigators knew they were getting closer to the truth, but the question remained: why had Mariah, an innocent bystander, been caught in the crossfire? Then, a breakthrough came. It wasn't physical evidence that cracked the case wide open, it was digital. A message, buried in the depths of Jaden Birch's Instagram account, would change everything. A chilling break came when investigators uncovered a conversation from Jaden Birch's Instagram account. It was an exchange between Jaden and a friend, but it wasn't the typical chat teenagers have about school or their weekend plans. In this conversation, Jaden spoke casually about the shooting, something he'd taken part in without any remorse. He mentioned the gunfire like it was a regular occurrence, without the slightest hint of guilt. And in a moment of unnerving nonchalance, he sent a simple message: "I know, I did it." It was as if the violence meant nothing to him. No guilt, no regret, just a casual admission, almost as if he were bragging. Jaden had no intention of hiding his involvement. His confession was damning. There it was, in black and white, a glimpse into the mind of a teenager who had just taken the life of a 12-year-old girl. The revelation stunned the investigators, but they knew they couldn't stop there. There was still more to uncover. As the days went by, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The digital confession was powerful, but there was still the matter of connecting the other two suspects to the crime. And it didn't take long for the investigators to find another key piece of evidence: Matthew Rice's DNA. Matthew Rice's DNA was found on the laser sight of the weapon used in the shooting. The same weapon that had been fired with such intent, the same weapon that had taken Mariah's life. It was a critical discovery, one that linked Matthew to the crime scene. The pieces of the investigation were finally starting to fit together, and the full extent of the conspiracy was beginning to reveal itself. But even as the investigators gathered more evidence, one key question remained. How had something so small, so seemingly insignificant, a schoolyard fight, spiraled into this? How had it turned into an act of such brutality, with no regard for who would be caught in the crossfire? Mariah had been an innocent bystander, her life taken because of a feud that had nothing to do with her. And yet, she had paid the price for it all. The detectives now had their answers, but the bigger question, why, still haunted them. The evidence was clear. Jaden Birch, Matthew Rice, and Jatarius Fluellen had orchestrated the shooting, each playing a part in the senseless attack. But what was the driving force behind their decision to kill? Was it just anger? Was it the desire for revenge? Or was there something darker at play, something that went beyond just a simple schoolyard squabble? And then there was the other question that lingered in the air. Could this have been stopped? Could someone, somewhere, have seen the warning signs, the growing tensions, and intervened before it was too late? It was a haunting thought for everyone involved, but it was too late for answers now. The truth was clear, and yet, the questions kept piling up. In the end, the investigation would lay bare the full story. The schoolyard fight, the rising anger, the access to weapons, and the eventual decision to act on impulse. But even as the truth emerged, one thing was certain: the lives of everyone involved, from the perpetrators to the victims, would never be the same. The investigation was far from over, and justice had yet to be served. But for Mariah's family, the damage had already been done. And the search for closure had only just begun. As the investigation progressed, the weight of the case began to bear down on the detectives. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and with each new discovery, the reality of what had happened grew more and more chilling. But there was still one crucial task that remained: bringing the perpetrators to justice. The first arrest came swiftly. Jatarius Rashad Fluellen, the youngest of the trio, was taken into custody. At just 14 years old, his involvement in the shooting was clear, but the reasons behind his actions remained a mystery. How had someone so young, still on the edge of adolescence, become part of a violent act that had claimed the life of an innocent child? Was he simply following the older teens, swept up in their anger and reckless behavior? Or was there something deeper, something within him that made him turn to violence? Fluellen's arrest was the first step toward justice, but the question of why he had participated in the attack still lingered. Was he coerced by his older peers? Did he understand the consequences of his actions? Or had he been living in a world where violence was normalized, where it was simply the next step in a life filled with bad decisions and dangerous influences? The answers, it seemed, could only be uncovered as the investigation continued, and as the next arrests followed. Next came the arrest of Jaden Birch. By this time, the entire town of Lake City was reeling from the news. A teenager, just 15 years old at the time of the murder, had supplied the guns and led the group to the Smith home. He was the one who had orchestrated the attack, the one who had walked up to the house with a weapon in hand, ready to take a life. Jaden Birch's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. His name was already linked to trouble, but no one could have predicted that a young man like him, who still had his whole life ahead of him, would commit such a horrific act. He had supplied the guns. He had walked to the house. He had been the one to pull the trigger. But was Jaden truly the mastermind behind it all? Or was he simply a pawn in a far more complex game of violence and revenge? Birch's role in the crime was clear, but the bigger question still remained: what had driven him to this point? He had the guns. He had the plan. But why? What had happened in his life that led him to take the life of an innocent girl? Was it pure pressure? Was it a sense of power, a need to prove himself? Or was there something more deeply rooted, something buried in the past that pushed him to make such a devastating choice? With Birch's arrest, the investigation seemed to be nearing its conclusion. But there was still one final piece of the puzzle to be put in place: Matthew Rice, the oldest of the three teens involved. Rice had been indicted in February 2024, and his arrest brought the case full circle. Matthew Rice was 18 years old when he was indicted for second-degree murder. By the time the arrest was made, the details of the crime had become all too clear. He had been the one to leave his DNA on the laser sight of the weapon, linking him directly to the crime scene. He had been part of the group that planned the attack, and while he wasn't the one who fired the fatal shots, his involvement was undeniable. For the families of Mariah Smith and the 3 young men involved in her death, the arrests were the first step toward justice. But for them, justice was a long, painful road. The emotional weight of the investigation hung heavy over everyone involved. For Todnisha Filer, Mariah's mother, the thought of seeing the teenagers who had taken her daughter's life facing consequences was the closest thing to closure she could hope for. But even with the arrests and indictments, there was no real closure. The crime, the violence, the anger, it had left an indelible mark on the lives of everyone involved. The pain would never truly go away. And for Mariah's family, the absence of their daughter would forever haunt them. As the case moved forward, the families of the victims, the suspects, and the community as a whole would have to grapple with the fallout of a tragedy that had been set into motion months earlier. The arrests were just the beginning. But for everyone involved, the path to healing, if it could ever be called that, would be long and uncertain. And the questions, too, would linger: what had led these young men to commit such a crime? And could anything have been done to prevent it? As the courtroom doors closed and the trial of Matthew Rice began, a heavy silence settled over the proceedings. The weight of the crime, Mariah's life taken so violently, hung in the air, thick and oppressive. The entire town of Lake City had been watching, waiting, and hoping for justice. Mariah's family, who had suffered immeasurable loss, sat in the front row, their eyes never leaving the defendants as they took their places at the defense table. But what would the court decide? Would the punishment fit the crime, or would the echoes of grief continue to reverberate through the Smith family for years to come? The trial moved quickly, a rare moment of speed in an otherwise slow and agonizing process. Less than an hour of deliberation was all it took for the jury to convict Matthew Rice of second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. The evidence had been damning: the DNA found on the laser site, the Instagram confession, and his role in the tragic event were undeniable. The guilty verdict was, in many ways, a relief for Mariah's family. But even as the gavel came down, there was no real sense of closure. How could there be? Mariah was gone. No verdict, no sentence could ever bring her back. The pain in the Smith family was palpable. Mariah's death had left a hole in their hearts, one that no legal victory could ever fill. But for Todnisha Filer, Mariah's mother, the conviction was something more. It wasn't just a legal win, it was the first small step toward justice. It was validation of the pain she had felt since the night her daughter was taken from her. But, at the same time, it was also a bitter reminder of everything she had lost. Her daughter was gone, and no sentence could bring her back. There would be no return to the quiet, simple life they had once shared. Mariah's mother, Todnisha, had fought tirelessly for justice. From the moment her daughter was taken, she became a fierce advocate for change, pouring every ounce of her energy into ensuring that Mariah's death would not be in vain. In the aftermath of the trial, Todnisha's voice became a powerful one in the fight against gun violence. During a memorial dedication for Mariah, she stood before the crowd, her voice trembling but resolute, as she made an emotional plea for an end to the violence that had taken her daughter's life. Her words were a mix of pain and determination: no other family should have to go through what I'm going through. We need to stop the gun violence. For Mariah. For all of us. It was a moment of triumph for Todnisha. Her daughter's name would live on, her legacy becoming a beacon of hope for change. But it was also a haunting reminder of the loss she would never be able to fully accept. Mariah would never return to her mother's arms, and that truth hung heavy in the air. Mariah's legacy, however, was only just beginning. The street where she had been killed had been renamed in her honor, a powerful symbol of the town's commitment to combating gun violence. But for Todnisha, this victory, this memorial, was bittersweet. Every time she passed the sign, she would be reminded of the daughter she had lost. Every day, she would feel the absence of the little girl who had once filled their home with laughter and light. But in the midst of her grief, Todnisha's fight for justice was far from over. While Matthew Rice's conviction marked one chapter in the case, there was still the question of the other two teenagers involved in the shooting. The trial of Jaden Birch had come to an end, and justice, in many ways, had been served. But the youngest of the trio, Jatarius Fluellen, had not yet faced his day in court. His trial was still ahead, and the questions surrounding his role in the crime remained unresolved. Was he simply a follower, a victim of peer pressure? Or did he, too, have a deeper role in the death of Mariah Smith? His fate, much like the future of the community, remained uncertain. Would Fluellen face the same consequences as his older counterparts? Would the justice system hold him accountable for his part in the violence? These were questions that would only be answered with time. The trial had ended, but questions still lingered. Was this the last piece of the puzzle? Or was there more to uncover? And what about Fluellen? His fate remained uncertain, and with it, the full truth of what had driven these young men to commit such a crime. Only time would tell if justice would truly be served, or if there was something even deeper to this tragedy that had yet to come to light. One thing was certain, though, the story of Mariah Smith's tragic death would not be forgotten. Her name would live on, her legacy inspiring a fight against the very violence that took her life. And as long as her mother, Tadnisha, had a voice, that fight would continue. In a historic move, Lake City officials renamed the street where Mariah's life was taken to Regina Smith Forever 12, Memorial Street. It was a powerful tribute to a life cut short far too soon. The new name on that street sign would forever mark the place where Mariah's dreams were tragically ended by an act of senseless violence. But as the city reflects on the loss, one question remains, hanging in the air like an unresolved chord: how many more lives will be lost before the cycle of violence is broken? How many more families will feel the weight of grief, the crushing pain of losing a loved one to something so preventable? The memorial, though an important symbol, is not enough. It serves as a reminder, but also as a plea for change, for an end to the violence that is destroying lives in neighborhoods like Lake City and beyond. Mariah's story is not just one of tragedy. It's a story of a mother's love, a community's sorrow, and a reminder that sometimes, even the smallest of feuds can lead to the most devastating consequences. The events that unfolded in Lake City weren't just the result of a single fight or a single decision. They were the product of a complex web of choices, influences, and a culture of violence that festers beneath the surface of many communities. For Tadnisha Filer, Mariah's mother, the loss was more than just the death of a child, it was the loss of a future. The future she had imagined for Mariah, filled with promise and potential, was stolen in an instant. Yet, through her pain, Tadnisha has shown the world the strength of a mother's heart. She's turned her grief into action, her sorrow into a call for change. Her fight, though born of heartbreak, has become a beacon for others, a rallying cry to stop the violence that is taking so many young lives. Mariah's legacy, though cut short, has sparked a conversation, one that asks us to reflect on the world we live in. Her name will forever be linked to the fight against gun violence, a symbol of innocence lost and a life that was taken too soon. But more importantly, Mariah's story reminds us of the devastating consequences that even the smallest conflicts can have when they escalate into violence. The fallout is not just felt by the victim, it ripples outward, touching everyone involved, everyone who witnessed it, and everyone who could have intervened. The tragedy that struck Mariah's family is not an isolated incident. Across the country, families are faced with similar heartbreak, torn apart by violence that could have been avoided. This should be a lesson for all of us, a lesson that violence, no matter how small it may seem at first, has the power to destroy lives in ways that cannot be undone. Let this be a lesson. Let Mariah's name live on as a call for change, a call to stop the violence, to make the world a safer place for our children. Her legacy is not one of despair, but of hope, a hope that we can prevent future tragedies, a hope that her death will inspire action, change, and the healing of a broken system. As we close this chapter, the questions remain. Could this have been prevented? Were there signs that could have stopped this before it reached the tragic end? And perhaps the most important question of all, what are we, as a society, willing to do to stop the violence. Each of us plays a part in the world we create. We can choose to be passive, to accept that these tragedies are inevitable. Or we can choose to act, to make a difference, to fight for the change that is so desperately needed. Mariah's story is a stark reminder of the power we have to shape the future, but it is also a somber warning of the price we pay when we fail to act.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.